千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. The second appearance, the third character, that's a verb. And the verb means to speak, to say, to talk. And we talked about how because it is the same character, people who do not know Chinese oftentimes will assume that the verbal form of the path or the way, it must mean to walk. So this has resulted in erroneous, misunderstood translations. I've listed examples here on the left-hand side, and it's easy to identify or understand why this mistake was made. It seems to make sense. When you have a word, a character that means the way or the path, the verbal form, it seems to make sense that it should mean to traverse that path, to go in a certain direction on that path. But that's actually not how the original text means. It actually means to talk or to speak. And you see the better understanding on the right-hand side of this column. These are all variations of talking, speaking, expressing, describing, discussing, etc. All of those on the right-hand side would be closer to the original meaning than all the ones on the left-hand side. So as I mentioned before, the travel-oriented misunderstanding is quite prevalent. The left-hand column in reality is actually the majority, whereas the right-hand column is the minority. And there are also people who realized that perhaps the verbal form of the Tao doesn't mean traversing, traveling, going, moving, walking, and therefore there's a tendency, as you see at the lower two lines of the left-hand side, that they will just make up a word. The way that can be weighed, the Tao that can be Taoed, to make that a verb, because they're not quite sure what that verb is supposed to mean. And I would like to just let everyone know there's no ambiguity, there's no vagueness. It's clear in the original language exactly what is being expressed. So I've got two columns on that first line. How is it misunderstood? Well, there are people who look at the line, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. They will come upon this understanding. They will say it means we should not talk about the Tao because the Tao that we talk about is not the real Tao. It's not the actual Tao. They may also say, talking about the Tao only proves you don't really know it. You don't get it. Your understanding is at a low level you're not at the high level of the sages. So they can come away with this kind of misunderstanding. Indeed, I see that in our world, there are people who will actually go in this direction and go even further in this direction. So it's rather common for me to hear people talk about the Tao, and then the question comes up, what is the Tao? So those who subscribe to this misunderstanding, and very often these are very glib charlatans, they would answer the question, what is the Tao? With the response, I don't know. And they usually say that with a smile. The smile means, I actually do know because I'm at a high level, but that is why I say that I do not, because what I can say is not the Tao, according to Lao Tzu. Now, this whole idea to not know something, indicating that you have a high level of knowledge, people would, of course, find this rather confusing. Some may readily assume it's confusing only because it's such a high level of wisdom that is beyond the ordinary. So the person, the charlatan, must have a high level of knowledge. What I want to let everyone know is that in actuality, this is not much more than a pretentious kind of double talk. So don't be taken in by that. Those who actually understand the Tao, I can guarantee will be able to express and explain the Tao in plain spoken, everyday language in a way that makes perfect sense, in a way that is very clear. And let's talk about other possible forms of misconception. This line is a paradox, or, oh, this line is just Lao Tzu being humble. It's a paradox. That's because in some circles, when we talk about a paradox, it can actually become a convenient category where you can group all the passages that don't seem to make sense. If it's not making sense, arbitrarily assign the label paradox, and that's it. You don't need to explain further. It's supposed to be a paradox. It is supposed to contradict itself. Again, those who actually understand the Tao will be able to pierce through all of that and say, no, that paradox, seeming paradox, results from a lack of understanding, and we can clear it up. And then what about Lao Tzu being humble? The idea is that Lao Tzu says is this is assuming that Lao Tzu means, well, the Tao that I'm talking about is not the real Tao because I don't even understand it all that well. And this is assumed to be Lao Tzu being humble, demonstrating humility. In reality, when you really understand what it means, Lao Tzu is being real. He's being down to earth. He's not making a statement about his own lack of knowledge. He's certainly not making a contradictory statement. He's being practical in emphasizing real world applications. What he's essentially saying is that, listen, let's not just sit around talking about what the Tao may be, what the Tao is philosophized, like what it should be, with a lot of hand waving, with a lot of concepts. At the end of the day, we all have to get off the couch and just do it. Just live life. Live the essence of the Tao, not just talk about it. That is a very practical perspective. And then lastly, there's a tendency as well to assume what we have here in the last bullet. This line is Lao Tzu being funny because it is immediately followed by 80 more verses full of words. So it's supposed to be a Taoist joke. Again, I have to clarify that no, it was never meant to be a joke. Now, actual understanding of the meaning of Lao Tzu does expose a phony kind of understanding asserted by experts, and that can be funny in its own way, because after all, our world is full of such phony experts. So the bottom line is that the first line is not a self-deprecating joke. It's not an expression of humility. It's not Taoist humor. It's not poking fun at the irony of the 80 additional verses, those who thought so, and those who assumed that they have a high level of understanding because of that insight. It's actually erroneous. Let's talk about what it actually means. Under the column better, the first bullet that you see there is words are limited because they cannot describe anything completely. So this is a pretty strong statement. And let me explain. When I say anything, I mean literally anything. Words are powerless to describe everything completely, no matter what that thing is. Any activity that we can think of, we can attempt to describe that activity with words. But when we're done with the description, we find that the best way, indeed, the only way to understand that activity is to engage in it. So this is a statement that applies universally because the Tao is universal. And previously, I used riding the bicycle as an example. The bicycle riding, just like every action or every activity we could possibly get into, riding the bicycle has a way about it that can never be fully described with words. And the way about it is the Tao. The Tao of bicycle riding. And then you can substitute any other activity. Any other activity like sports, like mental activity, listening to something, watching something, playing a game. It could be literally anything. So let's reference that back to the points that we have on the left-hand side. It is true that I can never describe the feeling of mastering how to ride a bicycle completely. That is a statement of reality. Am I saying that we should then never talk about riding the bicycle? Of course, I'm not saying that. I would never say that. The only point that I wanted to make is that to master riding, you just gotta ride. That's it. Am I saying that making that statement as a paradox? No, there is no paradox. I'm not contradicting myself or anyone. Am I being humble? Well, I want to be humble, but in that case, I was only making a factual statement. I wasn't making an attempt at humility. Was that a joke? Was I being funny? Again, no. I was simply stating a simple fact. I've got to ride. I got to get on the bicycle. I have to pedal to move forward. That's it. That's all it means. It can be very simple. So the last point is the major one. Lao Tzu is saying that this being the Tao, it's about life. It has to be experienced. It has to be lived. It has to be felt. The Tao teachings that we talk about, they must be used. They must be applied. We have to put them into daily practice. That literally is what Lao Tzu was trying to say. Of course, at the time that he wrote that first line, in all likelihood, Lao Tzu had no idea that subsequent generations would try to twist it into all kinds of strange, different shapes. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.